remember it's not called the editor, like the head of the department. She called me to her office. I was like, maybe Hadil, you should focus more on culture and like don't talk about politics. Like, okay. Yeah. And it was a report, what I made, oh my God, that was like 10 years ago, about two girls who were detained by Israel without a trial. And I made sure to get like an Israeli side of the story, Palestinian side of the story, and of course a neutral side. And they all said like they're underage, they can't be detained like this. And they just was like, no, we're not broadcasting this.
Interesting, even though you brought in the multiple perspectives of it too, it was still a little too controversial maybe for them.
Yeah. And that's how I literally moved into culture because I was like, I can't burn myself with this, even though I minored in political science. It's just so stressful. You're trying to make your voice heard and it's not.
Yeah, I'm sure that has to be frustrating.
It's also really cool. I didn't know that you minored in political sciences. I took political science while I was in a community college, so that's actually really cool.
It is, and I love the world of politics, but I think I'm too soft to be a politician.
Actually, that was the same way. Since we're sticking on like the topic of like, I guess like media and stuff like that, I wanted to ask the question of like how, because like I read one of your pieces about like women in Palestine and stuff like that, and so we wanted to bring up the question of like, you know, like how are women represented in like cinema and media, or like do you find that there are influences from other countries directly impacting like Palestinian media?
Are we talking media or films?
Both, maybe.
Specifically.
I feel like I guess like it's like a broad area. We're kind of like, I guess like both. Or like whichever you feel talking about.
So I want to talk about films because that's my field of expertise, and I think the Palestinian cinema is really unique in some that there is this scholar Hamid Nafisi, he's Iranian, and he wrote a lot about Palestinian cinema, and he calls it one of the most rare cinemas in the world because regardless where you are, if you produce a Palestinian cinema, it's made in exile. Because, you know, in the 48, when people were expelled, they either lived in internal diaspora within the historical map of Palestine, or they moved abroad to neighboring countries or all over the world. So producing a Palestinian cinema, it's something very unique because it's always related to the trauma of the 48, the nostalgia to the homeland, the connection to a country you grew up hearing about but you've never seen. The sad thing is that in Palestine we don't have cinema schools. So for people to study filmmaking, they either have to go to Israel and learn from in Israeli universities, which a lot of people frown upon doing that. And many of them who have the means, they can go to Egypt or anywhere, any other place in the world. So, and that's how I came about with my friend to co-found Film Lab Palestine, because, okay, yeah, we can start an academy to teach filmmaking. We're only two people with no money, but we submitted a grant proposal and got a fund to do a nonprofit that we do workshops. So we bring producers, we bring directors, script writers, anything related to the filmmaking industry, and we teach whoever is interested. And even though we don't give them like an academic certificate for that, at least you opened their horizon for something that's out there, that you don't have to just be a doctor, you don't have to be a lawyer or an engineer. The other thing is there's no infrastructure. There is lack of support from all agencies, and again, like the government is based on foreign aid, the nonprofit field is also based on foreign aid. And we witness when a right-wing government takes over takes control of the government, the fund would go down. We witnessed that with Denmark. We witnessed that, I would say, Austria. So the first thing they cut was like, okay, cut art funding to Palestine. So there's no stability. In my research, I try to see that the filmmakers who use Israeli sources versus the filmmakers, and that's only part of the research, who are dependent on the Palestinian resources. How does that affect the production of the film based on the narrative? Like, do they produce different narratives? Do they self-represent themselves as Palestinian differently? What strings are attached to the kind of funding that comes from Israel versus that's coming from anywhere else in the world? And it's interesting that, if I'm not mistaken, except for one, the Palestinian films that made it to the Oscars were produced by Israeli-Palestinian filmmakers. So except 5 Broken Cameras, and this year there's another one called The Present that's made by people who are not holders of Israeli citizenship. So that's part of why I want to see, like, how much does that affect the quality and the messages of the films they produce. Again, since we don't have infrastructure, there is barely any support, and there is lack of audience because many people, because as I said, the films, they tell the stories of the trauma, the everyday life of living under occupation. And I heard it from a lot of people, like, why would I go watch that on TV if I experience that every day? So there's also lack of local audience. Which means that they're producing to international audience. And how does that affect their messaging? Because if I'm producing to X, do I have to tailor my message so they can understand it, versus if I'm for someone who lives there? So that's about filmmaking. For media, I think social media helped a little bit with giving exposure to Palestine, to the Palestinians, and to the conflict. It's definitely easier, it's faster, it's cheaper, it's more accessible for content creators and for audience all over the world to connect.
Awesome.
How about that for a short answer?
That was awesome. So kind of sticking with the Film Lab and the cinema, when you were co-founding Film Lab, was there any particular challenges or highlights that you encountered? And I'm curious also, how did your community respond? Because you just mentioned there isn't really that local audience. Were they really excited about it? Were they kind of standoffish? I'm curious what their reaction was. Yeah.
So the challenges, of course, was the funding, hiring qualified staff with barely any money. It was a long process, but we did a pilot project in one of the refugee camps a year before that, and it was a huge success. And this is how we got the idea. We need something like, because there's something also with the nonprofit, with the NGO projects there, that there's no sustainability. So they would come, they would do the project, and they would leave, but there's no follow-up on what happened after. And that was one of the points, was like, no, we're going to do this, we're going to follow up with them, this is going to be like their base that they come back to anytime. We also managed to get equipment, so the filmmakers, they can come rent them for free. Like good cameras, tripods, all the things that they might need. Of course, not the highly sophisticated ones. So yeah, the biggest challenge was, I would say, the funding. How did the community reacted? The art scene in Palestine is a bubble. And it's, I always say it, like, it's funny when you go, for example, to an exhibition opening, it's the same people just rotating between one art gallery to the other. So I would say the art scene was happy to see something happen because it was about time for us to have something like that. And through Film Lab Palestine, now I'm not involved with it anymore because I'm here and like I don't have time to be involved. But they started a film festival called the Sunbird, and it followed like the international film festival footsteps in giving awards to the best script, the best image, the best. So, and it's been happening since I would say 2014 or 2015, every October.
Awesome.
Yeah, and now with COVID, everything is stopped. But like directors would come. And there's a connection between the European filmmaking scene with Palestine more than the American, I would say. And even Latin America is more than the US. So directors would come, they would send their films. And it's an exciting, like, with the humble planning and the humble red carpet they make. I think it's something. It's a step forward for the film industry scene there. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a huge accomplishment. Even having that film festival is definitely something to be proud of.
Yeah, yeah.
I kind of wanted to ask a question because you did a lot of like film, and I was wondering if there's like a certain like maybe like art style or like a certain like way that you like take on like film and stuff like that. Like, do you do more like art film or documentary type film or storytelling?
Oh, I've never done films.
Oh.
No. I am the so the founder and I'm the co-founder. He's the director and I'm the organizer because I don't know if you've ever worked with artists. They need someone to organize and make a plan with like follow 1, 2, 3. So I was more on the production side.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what aspects, I guess, of Western media do you think could be changed in order for people to become more aware of world issues?
So it's not only on world media, it's also on the people, because I feel people are comfortable with what they know. Again, people here are also living in a bubble. I think people have to burst this bubble and see what's happening outside their community or group of friends or family, know what's happening outside the continent US. And I think this is, I really like what Professor Stel is doing, because it's important to learn what's happening outside, especially if you're like studying media. So that's on the people that you have to seek more information. And for the media, you have to cover both sides. And it's not only about the conflict, because there's a lot of bias in covering other stories. Also, be careful where you consume your media from, because definitely somebody who consumes Fox News wouldn't be a fan of Muslims, for example.
Right.
I think if I watch Fox News nonstop, I wouldn't be a fan of anyone.
I've noticed too that I think since our last president, when he was going out and boasting all this fake news and stuff, we see a lot now of people not having faith in their news sources anymore, and not even knowing where to turn and who to trust, because I think both sides have shown, it depends on the source. Obviously, there are biases coming from each side.